Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Katie Raleigh. I'm the Outreach Librarian with the NOAA Central Library, and we are very excited to have you here with our next installment in the Ecosystem Fisheries Management series. A few logistics to start us off. If you can't hear or see the slides, you can't hear me, you can't see the slides, try logging off and logging back in. I'll put this in the chat as well. You are muted as an attendee, so if you want to ask a question or have a comment, please place that in the question panel and I will get that. This session is being recorded, so if you do put in a question, that will be recorded, and if it's a long question or if it's something we don't have time to get to, that will be shared with the speaker after the fact, but we do not keep your information for any other purpose. Also, we will be taking questions, but they will be at the end of the presentation. So we're happy for you to put those questions in at any time. We just won't ask them until the end. But with the logistics out of the way, this is recorded. It will be up on the library's YouTube channel after the fact, but I'm going to turn it over to Peg Brady to introduce our speaker and the topic today.
Thank you so much, Katie. Yes, this is Peg Brady from NOAA Fisheries, and welcome to our 2022 EBFM seminar series as it continues on a monthly basis on the second Wednesday of each month. This series started in 2017, and it was intended to increase awareness regarding ecosystem-based management and applying it in fisheries management setting, and to highlight the progress that folks at NOAA are taking, as well as our partners. So we've had a number of partners join us in this series as well. And NOAA Library continues to be our fantastic co-host, thanks to Katie and Claire. Today we're very, very happy to have one of our colleagues, Melissa Karp, who's a fishery science coordinator with the Office of Science and Technology at headquarters for the National Stock Assessment Program. Melissa joined us initially as a Knauss Fellow back in 2017. The title of her presentation is NOAA Fisheries Distribution Mapping and Analysis Portal, DisMAP, Visualizing Changing Distributions. And again, thanks so much to Melissa for presenting this month. And just a reminder, our next speaker is on June 8th, and that will be Josh Nolis, and it will be the same time and the second Wednesday in June. So thanks to everyone for joining us, and thanks for all the contribution of ideas and suggestions. We're always looking for speakers, so if anyone has any suggestions, please feel free to forward that to me, peg.brady@noaa.gov. Thanks so much, Melissa. I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Peg, for that introduction, and Katie for hosting this webinar. Yes, as Peg mentioned, I'm going to be presenting on our newly released NOAA Fisheries Distribution Mapping and Analysis Portal. I'm going to go through some slides here just to kind of go over the portal and our background and analysis, and then I'm going to have a demo and kind of walk through what the portal looks like and how you can interact with the data that we show on the portal, and then end with a quick slide summarizing some future directions. Okay. So it's becoming increasingly evident that our climate and oceans are changing, and we're seeing this through rising sea level, ocean acidification, loss of sea ice, and warming oceans. And a major impact of these changing climate and ocean conditions is the large-scale changes in distributions of many marine species as they're attempting to remain within their preferred environmental conditions. And the impacts of changing distributions reach far beyond the individual species experiencing that shift to affect entire ecosystems, fisheries interactions, coastal economies. Even the climate itself is impacted by these species redistributions. Examples of some effects on ecosystems include novel species interactions and assemblages, changes in food dynamics and trophic interactions, invasive species and species colonizing new habitat types, changing biogenic habitats, so changing where your oyster reefs or corals or seagrass are located, and phenological mismatches, so mismatch between the timing of the spawning event and when the prey is actually available within that area to larval or juvenile fish. Examples of impacts that affect human well-being, so this includes impacts on fisheries and economies, coastal communities, include new potential target species. So not all these impacts might be negative. New potential target species could potentially be a positive impact on a certain community as new species are moving into an area. You also might see increased travel distance. So the species is moving away from a port that it has historically been found near. Fishermen might have to travel farther to access that resource, and this can increase cost. You can also see decreased or increased catch potential depending on if species are moving into or out of an area. Also can see novel fisheries interactions. So as new species are moving around, they might be encountering different species and fisheries that previously weren't necessarily interacting or fishing in the same area, might now be fishing in the same area, and this can create some conflicts among fishing industries. This can also set up jurisdictional conflicts and management challenges as species are moving across jurisdictional boundaries, and this can set up some, conflicts in terms of allocations and how to manage those cross-jurisdictional species. So this is all to say that there is high demand for species distribution information for use in fishery science and management and other ocean use decision-making. And NOAA Fisheries and our partners collect extensive information on the distribution of species through our surveys and are increasingly conducting research that looks at understanding the factors that impact distributions of fish stocks. However, this information was not readily available in consistent, useful, easy to access format across the regions. And this led us to really ask how can we improve the access and delivery of this information to our end user stakeholder groups. And this led us to develop the Distribution Mapping Analysis Portal, which is a national online portal providing visualization and analysis tools to allow users to view, download, and dynamically interact with data to examine how species distributions are changing over time. And the portal provides access to information for over 800 marine fish and invertebrate species. Our mission with this portal is to improve the ease of access to and exploration of species distribution data, support decision makers to use this spatial data for insight and informing decisions such as fishery closed areas, marine protected areas, making some allocation decisions, dock boundaries, and survey designs. We also hope that this portal will help foster sharing and exchange of practices and ideas among scientists that are working on species distribution modeling and understanding how species are changing in space. So quickly, I just want to recognize the team behind this effort. So we have our expert team, our working group that is comprised of representatives from the Office of Science and Technology, the Office of Sustainable Fisheries, and the Integrated Ocean Observation System program, as well as representatives from each of our fishery science centers and our partners at Rutgers University who worked on a pilot project for this called Ocean Adapt, and this effort really is building off of that collaboration and bringing it to the next level. We also have our development team here who sits within the Office of Science and Technology and is responsible for really building the infrastructure for our portal. This team led by our lead developer here, Tim Haviland, our JavaScripter and web app developer, Venkat Sankara, and our GIS analyst, John Kennedy. So the longer term vision for the portal is to have it have several modules where users can interact with and explore the distribution data in different ways. For this first version that we released in April, we have 2 modules up and running: the single species distribution module, where users can explore both visual and numerical representations of several key metrics that describe a species distribution and understand how those distributions change through time. And then a regional summary module where users can explore how communities of a region have changed through time, looking at species richness and also average change in distribution across the core set of species through time. The other 2 modules here, the multi-species overlap and the species shifts and human interaction modules, are 2 that we have planned for future releases. So quickly about our data compilation and processing, where we're getting the data that we've done on the portal and how we've processed it. So on the top here just shows our step-by-step process. I'm going to walk through each of these steps now. So in this first version of the portal, all of our species distribution products are derived from the NOAA Fisheries regional bottom trawl survey data, and therefore they don't take into account alternative sources of fisheries data coming from like longline surveys, plankton surveys, or any fishery dependent surveys. Because of this, our distribution products are not developed for the Pacific Islands of the Caribbean, but we have it for the Northeast, Southeast, Gulf of Mexico, US West Coast, and the Alaska regions. Building in the additional regions, the Pacific Islands of Caribbean, are areas of interest though for future releases. So basically, once we've downloaded that raw survey data from our regional databases, we run it through a R script that was originally developed by the Ocean Adapt team at Rutgers, and we've modified for the DisMAP effort. Through this R code, we evaluate the survey coverage within each of the regions to ensure a consistent spatial footprint, and therefore we, for a couple of regions, remove some strata or years that were not sampled, that had poor sampling coverage throughout the time period. We also trim the data sets to only include species that were caught in more than 3/4 of the survey years for each of the trawl surveys, and this resulted in the, over 800 species being presented in our data sets. This final process data includes following variables. We have region, haul ID, year, latitude, longitude, stratum area, depth, species, and the weight catch per unit effort. That final process data set is then passed through a Python script to generate our interpolated biomass distribution surfaces, which provide information on how much of the species is expected to be present at any given location within a particular area. These services are generated using inverse distance weighting interpolation, and this interpolation allows us to estimate the weight CPUE kind of across the whole domain in areas where kind of in between where we've sampled. For the interpolation process, we cube root transform our weight CPUE values, and then for the spatial weighting parameters, we're using a power of 2 in our inverse distance weighting, a search radius about 200 kilometers, and a minimum number of sites included being 10 and a maximum of 15 within that search radius. We also include a temporal weighting, so we're using a 5-year window of data, with the year being mapped, having the highest weighting, and then 1 year on either side, a little bit lesser weighting, and then 2 years out on either side, lower weighting, and then all other years given a 0 weighting. And this just helps smooth out a little bit of that interannual variability through a time series. The interpolation is then carried out on 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer pixel cell size, and our interpolation boundaries, which you can actually see in the 2 example interpolation maps here in the red outline. These boundaries are determined by examining kind of the survey footprints, but also taking into account that we've trimmed some of the survey footprints to be the area that's consistently been sampled through the whole time period. From the interpolated biomass layers, we calculate 2 distribution metrics, the center of gravity and our range limits, and plot those through time. Example here being for the center of gravity latitude, shown in the graph here. So the center of gravity, or centroid or center of biomass, is the central location of a population, and this either can be in terms of population central latitude or its central depth, and is calculated as a biomass weighted average location of the population using this formula here, where DI is the value of the latitude that's associated with each of the grid cells, and TI is the predicted kind of interpolated weight CPUE value at that grid cell, and K is the total number of grid cells in the study area. The result of this calculation is 1 center of gravity value for each year in the time series for each species, and we track this indicator through time to help us understand the kind of the direction that the population is moving. If it's moving north or south or deeper or shallower. We also calculate range limits, which is the geographic boundary beyond which a species does not occur. And it's a measure kind of the leading edge and the trailing edge of a population, so the northern and southern boundaries of a population. Changes in the range limits, particularly the difference between the northern and southern range limits, can indicate if a population is undergoing a range expansion. So if the distance is increasing between those two boundaries and expanding, or a range contraction if the distance between the edges of the population are shrinking. We calculate this again based on our interpolated biomass raster layers, where the minimum latitude, which is that southern range limit, is the latitude where 95% of the species biomass is found above that. And then the northern range limit is where 95% of the population biomass is found below that. And you can see in this graph here, it shows the center of gravity in the red here as the in terms of latitude, and then the blue here showing that range limit, with the top part of the blue being the northern and the bottom part of the blue being the southern. And you can see that through time, the center of gravity is moving north for this species, and the range is contracting as that southern range limit is moving north, but the northern range limit isn't really moving all that much. So it's leading to a contraction of the distribution. We also provide, again, I mentioned the second module we provide in this first release being that regional summary module. And the regional summary products are based on a core set of species within each region. And we define that as species that are caught in all years of a particular survey. So from that core set of species, we generate a species richness map for each of our regions. And this displays the number of species that are present, are kind of expected to be present within our trawl surveys for at each of the grid cells. And they're calculated by stacking each of our individual species biomass layers and counting the total number of species where the weight CPUE, the biomass, is greater than 0. And then for each region, we also calculate average changes in latitude and depth, kind of averaged across all those core species, and plot those as time series graphs as well. So now I want to move over to the application itself. Okay. So here is the landings page for the DisMAP application. And this is kind of if the user kind of first searches for DisMAP, it should point them to this landing page. So it might point you to the application itself. But here's our landing page where we provide an overview of the portal, kind of explain a little bit about distribution shifts and the goals of the portal, discuss what's in the portal and go through those metrics of distributions that I mentioned, the center biomass and the range limits, as well as provide some more information, links to kind of additional information on climate change and fisheries and stock assessments, as well as a link to our technical report that goes into more detail about the processing and data analysis that we conducted. From this landing page, you can launch the portal. And if it's your first time visiting the page, we have it set up to prompt you to go through this kind of website tour. But at any point, you're able to click out of it if you just want to go straight to the portal. But the website tour gives you a kind of walkthrough of like how to get started, kind of clicking on the side panel icons. It talks about what the single species distribution module is, the regional summary modules, and then ends with this kind of welcome splash page, which again provides a little bit of information on the portal and also links to that technical document as well as our metadata records in import. And you can click to not show it again if you don't want to. So on the single species module, this is where you would go to explore the changes in distributions of an individual species of interest. On this module, you'd first select from our drop-down menu a species of interest. And you can do this by either scrolling down our list of 823 species or so that we have here, or you can start typing in the scientific or common names. So for this, I might start typing in, let's look at red hake. So once you've selected your species, you can then select the data set, and this is the kind of region and season of that particular trawl survey data where that species was caught. So you click your data set of interest, and then once that's been selected on the map, we have a couple different layers that are visualized. The first layer we have is that interpolated biomass that's shown in kind of the solid purple to greenish cloud surface. And we have our legend here that shows kind of the brighter yellows and greens are higher biomass, and the darker purples and blues are lower expected biomass. We also have our survey catch. So these are those bubbles here, the dots of different sizes, with the larger size indicating higher catch. And these are the actual survey locations and amount of catch for red hake in the Northeast U.S. Fall Bottom Trawl Survey through time. And then the last layer here is that data set boundary, and this is shown in the red line around, that's showing kind of the extent of the survey and our interpolation. These layers are also, they can be toggled on and off by clicking our radio buttons on the side panel here. So if you just want to look at the survey points or just want to look at the interpolated biomass layer, you can toggle on and off the different layers. They're also time aware. So that's one of the really cool features of this, is that you can see kind of annual changes through time in the distribution of these species by playing our time slider. And you can see how the distribution is changing through time for this species. You see it's kind of moving a little bit north as time goes on. On the side panel here, we show the time series graphs for those key metrics of the distribution metrics. So the top one here is showing the change in latitude through time. And you can kind of see it's moved about 129 kilometers north for this species. And it's not really expanded, like 2 kilometers. So I don't really expanded this distribution, just kind of shifting northwards. As well as you have here the change in depth, and you can see that red hake has moved about 51 meters deeper through the course of the time series. The data from the graphs here are downloadable, so you can click on this. Gives you a little disclaimer about understanding that we've processed the survey data and kind of understanding how we've processed it, and gives you the links to the technical reports as well. You can, and then you can click download, and it gives you either a CSV or you can choose an Excel version. So that's for the graph data. You can also download the survey points, and again, this is the process survey data that we used in our analysis. And if users are interested in the original survey data, we provide links to those sources in both our metadata and the technical documents as well. Within the single species analysis, we also offer an area overlap analysis tab. And this is where users can look at how the selected species distribution is changing relative to an area of interest. So you can either select from an existing area of interest. We have a couple layers available in here right now. We hope to include some more layers moving forward. Or you can draw out an area of interest using our draw tool. So for instance, if I'm interested in understanding how the distribution is changing relative to New Jersey waters, I can kind of sketch roughly the coast off of the area off of New Jersey. And then the portal calculates 2 metrics from that, looking at how the percent of this area I've just drawn, how the percentage of that area covered by the species distribution changes through time. And then a second one that's showing how much of the total biomass of red hake, or whatever species of interest, in this case red hake, how much of the total biomass of that species is found within this area of interest and how that changes through time. So in this case, you can see that initially with that 4% of the total biomass increased and then started decreasing again through time. You can kind of see how that happens to the time-aware feature as well. And these graph data are also downloadable for use outside of the application. And then lastly, we have our regional summary module. And this is where, again, you can look at kind of how the distributions on average within an area, how the group of species are moving. So you can select an area of interest. Here I go to the Eastern Bering Sea. And again, on the map here, it displays the species richness. So number of species expected in each of these grid cells, with again the brighter yellows being a higher number and the darker purple being lower predicted number of species. This is also time aware, so you can see how that changes through time. And then the graphs on the side panel again being the kind of average change. So this is an offset, so it's average change relative to the starting year, and it's been averaged across all species. So this is a change in latitude and then change in depth. Also for the regional summary tab, we have here a table in the end that lists all the species that were included in this kind of those core set of species. So for Eastern Bering Sea, there are 64 that were caught in all years of the survey that are included in the averaging for this regional summary module. You can sort them by scientific name, by species name. You can also sort if you want to look at kind of in the table we show the change in latitude and change in depth for those individual species. So you can sort, like I want to see which species show the most northern shift in this region. In this case, it's hair crab. Or I want to look to see which species shows the greatest change in depth. And this is a Greenland cockle in this case, but you kind of explore it a little bit like that and also download the data from that table as well. Okay, so I mentioned the first release focuses on our fishery independent bottom trawl survey data, but for future iterations of the portal, we kind of are seeking to include additional survey data and model outputs, both within US regions and also expanding into Canada. So for instance, efforts will be beginning this summer to pull in the Hawaii bottomfish fisheries independent survey data and incorporating that into DisMAP. And we also will be working with Canadian partners through existing partnership to work to pull in their DFO trawl survey data, so that way we're expanding our coverage throughout all of North America, or all of US and Canada. We're also looking to pull in outputs from species distribution models, so looking at both hindcast and forecast of distributions, so we can really kind of link a little bit more to the underlying environmental conditions that are impacting distributions and helping us project out into the future what might be expected. We also will be looking to build in those two modules that I mentioned at the beginning, that port availability, so the species shift and human interaction module. And this is like key module, kind of as species are shifting. And I mentioned, I think earlier in the beginning, that target species may become less available to certain ports that they were historically located near, and therefore might have more travel time and distance to get to those areas where fish can be found. And they also might be becoming more available or more accessible to other ports. So this module will really enable users to examine how the availability of a particular species to a port has changed and is projected to change through time. And then the second module, the multi-species interaction overlap, we kind of know that Species interactions and community composition are expected to change as species are shifting in, not in isolation, species are shifting in different directions, and that can create different interactions between species. And this multi-species analysis module will help users explore kind of changes in species overlap and interaction of two species of interest, so like a predator and prey or bycatch and target species. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. And also, please feel free to contact me at melissa.karp@noaa.gov if you have any further questions that are not answered during today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Melissa. This was excellent, and we do have questions coming in, so I'm going to just get it started. With regard to the interpolated biomass shaded areas, does the lack of a shaded area mean zero biomass, or that there just weren't any data available for that region?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It represents zero predicted biomass in that region. So it's regions where we did have a survey go there and it didn't catch anything for that species, and our interpolation therefore estimated zero biomass.
Great, thank you. Next question. Are there plans to integrate other sources of data into these maps?
Yes, so I mentioned that we're hoping to bring in other types of survey data beyond just the bottom trawl surveys. So trying to bring in the Hawaii data that's not a trawl survey, and looking into potentially long line data or tracking data that can also provide information on species distributions. That's kind of an area of interest that we have for expanding the portal. Just have to kind of think about a little bit how best to incorporate that and present it to our end users within our platform. For non-species data, in terms of like bringing in maybe like environmental layers, we have discussed, and I think there's interest and possibility to bring in kind of contextual information. So working with partners in IUCE and other groups that provide environmental information, so sea surface temperature or chlorophyll, that maybe we can work with them to provide it in the right time scale and spatial scale that matches up with our distribution layers, so people can start exploring how the distribution shifts match up with the environmental changes in that region. So that's kind of a natural next question people tend to ask is, well, why are things shifting? And so we've discussed looking into ways to try to provide some of that environmental information as kind of context for some of the changes that are being seen.
Got it, thanks. Next question. Is only trawl data going to be used, or other fishing gear surveys would be included as well? For example, mahi-mahi dolphin fish is not harvested with trawl gear.
Yeah, so that kind of gets into the previous question a little bit, that because we're limited right now with the bottom trawl data, but recognizing again that not all species that are of interest are caught in our trawl surveys, and all our regions have them. Exploring ways to pull in some of that additional types of survey data and working to kind of create a similar data processing that we had for the trawl survey data, and seeing if we can apply that to some of the other types of data like the long line or acoustics or that kind of stuff, that seeing if we can apply a type of analysis like we did for the trawl survey data in terms of developing interpolated biomass layers. Also, when we start pulling in species distribution model output, there could be some species where there was a distribution model developed using a different data source, not using trawl survey, but using something else, and they were able to develop a distribution model based on that. And that could be another way that we could pull in that distribution information for those species, even if we can't pull in the raw survey data.
Great, thanks. Any plans to bring in marine mammals?
So at the moment, we are focusing on fish and invertebrate species. We haven't really approached the subject yet about bringing in marine mammal or sea turtle or protected resources at this time. And we have probably not our focus for the near term. Yeah.
Got it. Understood. Next question. How is this related to the portal? I'm trying to get this question right. How is this related to the portal, to Duke's projected data layers or current forecasting research on range shifts?
Yeah, so Duke, my understanding of the Duke's portal, I don't want to misquote what their work is, but my understanding is they have done work with marine mammals. They have like a whale distribution portal up for, I think, most of the East Coast and Gulf of Mexico. And they also worked, I think, with the Marco portal, the Mid-Atlantic regional ocean portals and the Northeast regional ocean portals on some of their distribution layers. So we've been in contact with those groups as well to kind of think about collaborations and coordination in this group. My understanding is that those layers are a coarser time scale. They're more decadal changes in distribution, and also focused on a lot of ocean use issues. But it is a very similar process. I think actually their work also used some of the Ocean Adapt R code as well. So there's definitely some overlap in our analysis in how we process the data. But I think kind of the temporal scale which we're looking at it is slightly different. And I believe theirs is focused on, again, Northeast only.
Got it. Thanks. Next question. This is kind of a follow-up to the question about bringing other data in. Is there potential to bring in specific data on environmental hazards with new marine heat wave forecasts out? Would you consider projecting marine heat waves and species distributions forward?
That's a really interesting idea. As not something we have discussed. And I think that's something we could add, talk to with the steering committee on how that could potentially be carried out, and if there's interest and use for that, if that's something we need, to consider adding to one of our future releases or not. It's definitely an interesting idea. Have to think a little bit more about how we would go about doing that.
Great, thanks. I'm not sure if this is a would or a will, but would/will GIS data be available for the latest distributions?
So yeah, that's actually one of the things on our kind of higher priority for the next year or so. Right now, our interpolated biomass layers are not downloadable through the portal, but there is our import record where there's like I think like a RESTful API URL in there, where I think folks can actually get access to the individual interpolated biomass layers for use outside the portal, but it's definitely not a straightforward user-friendly way to have it. So we're working on trying to find ways that we can make those layers accessible and downloadable for use in other GIS applications or other analyses that folks have interest in outside the portal. So that's on our list of high priority upgrades for future releases.
Great. Next question is, what about forage species not caught in NMFS surveys, and how can this work support EBFM?
Yeah. So that goes into a little bit about bringing in additional data sources and trying to work with folks to determine what those additional surveys or data that we have available would be, that we would kind of target for pulling in the future. Whether or not it's pulling in this particular survey that captures a species, or again when we start kind of trying to build in and pull in the species distribution model outputs, if models have been developed for forage species, we can pull those in as appropriate in the future. And I also think we're kind of, one thing that we've discussed with the working group and thinking about pulling in is for that regional summary module, instead of just showing the core species, we could have the ability to sort it by ground fish or by forage or different species categories, so you can see how particular species groups are changing distribution, and that can give you a kind of an idea of ecosystem changes as well. I don't know if that answers.
That's okay. I think we have a follow-up question that's on this topic as well. They're curious about how you handle data for target species versus species caught incidentally. So do you use presence or absence in these cases, or always attempt to use biomass?
So we're using biomass for all of species. So we treat all the species that are caught in surveys the same in terms of our analysis. One way we try to avoid kind of some species that are just happen to be caught every now and then in the survey, but aren't really well caught or targets of the survey, by only including species that are caught in at least 3/4 of the years. Therefore, it's like if it just caught a couple of times, we don't do an analysis on those species. But they're all treated once we kind of have that trimmed list of all the species that are caught regularly in the surveys. We treat them all the same in terms of the weight CPUE calculations and interpolation methods.
Great, thank you. I'm going to take 2 more questions here. Will the site provide a workflow or a guidance to join the DFO and NOAA trawl data to enable the use of both data sets in an analysis? For example, how species movement along the West Coast?
Yeah, no. His short answer is no, in terms of providing a workflow, but that is building cross-basin distributions, like ways to integrate the data from these different regional surveys and create distributions that for species that span multiple survey boundaries or countries is something that we do is an important research question. And I think one of the things good about DisMAP is that because it's national, in the way it's set up where you can view an entire coastline, we're hoping that future versions, once those types of models and cross-basin analyses are carried out, that DisMAP could be a great place to host those results, where users can then look at Northeast, Southeast, or East Coast combined. But I think that developing those cross-basin distributions and kind of intercalibrating across these different surveys is still an area of active research at this time. Yeah, but we are hoping to provide that in the future, or work with those who might have those layers developed already or in process.
Great, thanks. Okay, grab this last question. This is an incredible tool. Congrats on all the hard work. How do you hope managers would use this information, and what can managers do with this knowledge?
Yeah, that's the, I guess, key question here. So one way that I think this tool is really useful for managers is to provide a quick way to visually see and understand how species distributions are changing, have changed for them. a lot of the allocation decisions and fishing areas are based on historic distributions of species, and understanding that, oh no, actually things have changed. Even when you're looking in the past, it's showing you that things have changed, that maybe we need to start adjusting our management accordingly. I think this can give a really good visual representation of that, and a quick way to identify which species have shifted and therefore might be the most concerning species moving forward. And then kind of a starting point for some of that future analyses. And then as we build in those forecasts, it can help understand kind of what might be changing and help inform scenario planning activities. And as well as, I think that area overlap analysis tool can be quite helpful too, to understand how the distribution is changing relative to particular areas of interest. So relative to, North Carolina's coastline, or relative to the Gulf of Maine or something like that, to help understand how that proportion of an area is occupied by a species, proportion of an area's distribution found within a, or proportion of a total biomass of a species relative to an area of interest is changing through time. I think that can be really useful information for managers as well, and a cool tool to be able to look into those sorts of area changes.
Great, thanks so much, Melissa. I'm going to wrap it there. Peg, do you want to tell everyone when the next presentation is?
Yes, thanks, Melissa, and thank you. I appreciate that, Katie. Yes, June 8th, same time, same place, and we'll have Josh Nolas presenting on that day. So stay tuned, and if you're interested in learning more about it, there's also the archives if you want to see past presentations. And if you know anybody that may have missed today's presentation, please share that link with them too. So that's about it. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Appreciate it. Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah.
Great job.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Take care, stay safe, and have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.